South Park just made its big return after 3 weeks of hiatus, an unprecedented break during an unprecedented time in our history. And in the time that South Park was gone, we've had a political assassination, an episode pulled from syndication, MAGA blaming the show for recent events. It's been pretty crazy. So I think it's safe to say that as we were waiting for this new episode to come out, everybody was thinking the same thing. Is this gonna be about Charlie Kirk? I bet it's gonna be about Charlie Kirk. I bet they delayed the episode to make it about Charlie Kirk. What are they gonna say about Charlie Kirk? And the answer to those questions was nothing. It's about Kyle's mom striking Gaza.
Why the hell would my mom destroy a Palestinian hospital?
'Cause she's a Jew?
You know, I thought I was gonna be really disappointed if they avoided talking about the Charlie Kirk stuff. And I kinda am, because I do think there's a lot they could have done with it, and it was obviously extremely relevant. But this was easily my favorite episode of the season, so it kinda totally makes up for it. And yes, that is partially because of the fact that the boys are back, which may have taken half a season to happen, and it may have been more about Kyle and Cartman than Stan or Kenny, but god damn it, it was glorious to see them all together again. And I don't care if I'm being soy as hell for eating up that fan service, because I loved it. Now, as for the actual subject of the episode itself, I gotta say, I never expected them to talk about Israel-Palestine. I mean, it's just such a big subject to cover, and I honestly couldn't think of how they would make an episode about it funny in any way. But hats off to Matt and Trey, they did it, and they managed to do it in a way that I think is gonna be very well received by the general population. Though to be fair, it's not exactly an Israel-Palestine episode. That part's only tangentially related to the main theme of the episode, which is conflicts of interest. But thankfully, they still did a really good job of tying it to the rest of the story and making it feel earned. Which they did by connecting everything in the episode to a free market betting app that has taken over the school. Yeah, it's kind of a weird setup, but trust me, it works. It all starts with some kid in class doing a presentation on Weebelows of America, which nobody in class gives a about, cause why would they? But the presentation catches the attention of the class anyways, because nobody can tell if the kid presenting to them is a boy or a girl.
Well, now they also allow girls, and I myself, as a Weebelow,
Now, honestly, there's nothing special about this scene, but I kind of just loved it anyway, because, I don't know, the jokes with the kids at school just is kind of my jam. I think it's because they always do such a great job of making it feel accurate to how kids actually would act in these situations. And to me, it's just so funny and real that the whole class would be super invested in this kid's gender instead of their actual presentation. And when I say invested, I don't just mean curiosity. I mean, these kids are literally betting on their gender like some sort of degenerate gambling addict at a gender reveal party. Yeah, it turns out that every kid at school is using the same prediction market app to bet on basically everything that happens there, whether it's the outcome of the girls' soccer game, if tater tots will be served for lunch next week, if Kyle's mom will strike Gaza and destroy a Palestinian hospital, you know, just your typical schoolyard crap that we all grew up on. I mean, who hasn't bet on Sheila striking Gaza before? Am I right? But seriously, one of my favorite parts about this episode is that we never actually find out who placed the bet on the app. Because naturally, you'd assume that it was Cartman who started it, even though he claims he didn't do it. Not that that means much considering that he lies about everything. But the idea that it's not Cartman actually reinforces one of the big parts of this episode, which is about the rise in anti-Semitism among the general public. A point that I feel hits much harder when the bet is started by a normal kid at South Park Elementary. Because we expect that stuff from Cartman, but when it's coming from the general public, then that's concerning. Anyways, this episode isn't just about Kyle's mom or the betting app, because it's also got 2 other stories that it juggles throughout. And naturally, as with all episodes in this season, that means there needs to be some kind of tie-in to Trump and Satan. But unlike with previous episodes where that tie-in comes directly from the story, they actually don't really have much to do with what's happening in town. Instead, it's more like a thematic connection. It's just about how they're going through their own conflict of interest, parallel to everything else that's happening in the show. And I gotta say, even though it's more of a loose connection this time around and it doesn't really relate to the Israel-Palestine stuff directly, they actually did a pretty good job of segueing into the Trump stuff from this setup. Because now that everybody is aware of Trump and Satan's butt baby, Fox News is reporting on how these same free market betting apps are trying to predict whether that baby will be a boy or a girl. Which brings us to the White House, where we get to see our first update on the president.
Well, when the baby comes, you will have to give it all your attention. No more traveling, no more long nights at Mar-a-Lago.
You know, the more I see these White House bits, the more I think that JD Vance is by far the best thing about them. I mean, just look at that ridiculous walking animation cycle. He's so stubby and goofy looking. How can you not crack a smile? Anyways, this Trump and Satan part of the episode is basically like a Looney Tunes bit that focuses entirely on Trump trying to do whatever he can to terminate Satan's pregnancy. Well, anything but get an abortion, because that would piss off his supporters and make him look like a total hypocrite. And that's really the crux of how this fits into the episode. Trump doesn't want the baby, but aborting the baby would be a conflict of interest. And that's basically how this episode works. Each storyline has a different conflict of interest that the show's critiquing, and this first act is all about setting those up. And you know, for an episode that has this much going on, I gotta say, it's very well paced. Take the Kyle storyline. They were really smart about letting that one breathe for a bit before getting to how his storyline also covers a conflict of interest. Because the inciting incident from the recess scene shows us how upset the bet about his mom made him, but it doesn't rush us through that. In fact, when we return to the school, we actually get another scene of Kyle being upset before his plot finally escalates, which I think goes a long way in making the unfolding of that plot feel organic. Plus, it gives us this joke from Jimmy.
Oh, I know, Kyle. I told a joke about Gaza on a Zoom meeting yesterday, and nobody laughed. I guess it's not even remotely funny.
Remotely funny? See guys, I can clue into wordplay humor too. I'm not always a total idiot, just sometimes. That's for the 900 comments I got last time because I missed one joke. But yeah, this scene is great because it achieves a ton of setup all at once without feeling forced. Like on one hand, we get the setup for Cartman's side of the story when Kyle has his big outburst, because that leads to the other kids thinking that Sheila actually will strike the hospital, which causes them to place a bet on it and increase the odds. But the scene doesn't just end there, they make every moment count. And so Kyle's confrontation with Jimmy also leads to him learning that he could reach out to a strategic advisor who represents the predictive market app, and that's a way he could potentially get the bet taken down, which sets up the main conflict of interest for the episode. The federal government, via the FCC, has their hands in everything. Because you see, when Kyle calls that strategic advisor for the predictive market app, the person who answers the phone is Donald Trump Jr. I mean, they don't say it's him, but like, come on. Look at him. Tell me that's not Don Jr.'s hairline and teeth. Also, the fact that he's a strategic advisor here is the other big giveaway, since the real Don Jr. actually is a strategic advisor for a predictive market firm. And for MMA Incorporated. Yeah, this dude is just a strategic advisor for like everything. Which is probably why every time Kyle calls anyone within the government, it's always Don Jr. who answers the phone.
Hello? Hello? Hello?
That last one was genius. I don't care what anyone says. A perfect use of the rule of threes if I've ever seen one. Also, side note, I feel like this is the craziest character model we've seen from the show in a long time. And that's saying something considering that this thing exists. But seriously, I don't think we've ever gotten such a weird mix of a real photo and cartoon drawing before. It's just so bizarrely creepy looking. Anyways, the joke here is incredibly on the nose, and you probably don't need me explaining it to you, but I'm a YouTuber, so I'm gonna do it anyway. But yeah, this whole gag is making light of the fact that the federal government in America controls basically everything. Like, they have full control over what offensive material is or isn't allowed on private apps or TV, and it's clear that the main target here is the FCC, which is who they focus on the most. And like, yeah, it's definitely no coincidence that they chose to do this the week after Jimmy Kimmel's show was put on an indefinite hiatus, which, if you somehow don't know about, basically, Kimmel's show was seemingly canceled after he made light of the Charlie Kirk assassination, where he suggested that the Republicans were desperately trying to pin the murderer as being left-wing, even though they didn't have sufficient evidence for the claim, in his words. Which obviously really pissed a lot of people off, including the government. Now, thankfully, that didn't end up happening, and his show is now back on the air, but obviously, whether you agree with Kimmel's statements or not, I think it goes without saying that he shouldn't be losing his show over those comments. He's a comedian, he's entitled to make jokes, he's allowed to say his opinion on the situation, and his opinion wasn't a call to violence or anything messed up like that, at least not from what I've seen. So the government trying to come in and shut him down is definitely overstepping. And look, I think making light of someone's death is messed up, but like, the idea of the FCC taking his show away over it is not any better. If his show gets canceled, it should be because he sucks and isn't funny and hasn't been funny for like a decade. But hey, I'm just biased because I'm a Simpsons man, and at heart, Conan is my real goat. But anyways, I like that this episode is very clearly commenting on that situation with the FCC while still being indirect about it and not outright saying it. Like, they're not including Jimmy Kimmel in the episode, but they are punishing Brendan Carr relentlessly.
No, Brendan Carr, no!
Whoa! Oh!
Yeah, so this is what I meant when I said that the Trump and Satan storyline in this episode is on some Looney Tunes shit. because in order to terminate the pregnancy, Trump sets up all these ridiculous traps for Satan that are supposed to kill the baby, only for Brendan Carr to set them off each time. And I gotta say, maybe it's just because some childish part of me really enjoys that lowbrow slapstick humor, but so far, this is actually my favorite Trump storyline of the season since the first episode. Because like, as fatigued as I am on the whole Saddam character thing, I do find the physical humor pretty funny. And I think it's very amusing that these parts of the episode are basically just there to torture Brendan Carr. Kinda reminds me of the Osama bin Laden episode from season 5 where they also went full Looney Tunes. Only this time it's to get back at the FCC. Cause you know, even though Trey and Matt can't really do much about the Kimmel situation, they can make Brendan Carr eat on their show. Which I of course just mean as a turn of phrase to say that he's taking which I of course just mean as a turn of phrase to say that he shit his pants so hard that he flew out the window. Anybody else notice that this is almost like the exact same joke they made with Kenny's dad in the Nambla episode? You know, where Kenny tries to get his mom's pregnancy terminated? I mean, I don't mind, it's still funny, but I just thought it was worth pointing out. Also, kind of a missed opportunity that they didn't do anything with Tylenol, but you know, whatever, I can forgive it. Anyways, to close out the first act, we finally get the last conflict of interest that sets up the rest of our story. As Cartman is eating lunch in the cafeteria with Stan and Kenny, he explains that the odds for Kyle's mom striking the hospital have actually gone up since Kyle had his outburst. Which means that if he can keep Kyle angry while also stoking the flames of anti-Semitism in Skew, then they can keep raising those odds while betting against it. Which is essentially like fixing the bet due to a conflict of interest, hence the name of the episode. Now I'm gonna be honest, maybe this is just because I'm ignorant as hell, but I actually have no clue what this is supposed to be a commentary on. Like if there's something that Cartman's conflict of interest here is alluding to, I don't know what it is. And I mean, maybe it's not a commentary on anything and is more of like an at face value story between the boys, which I'm totally cool with, by the way. I'm entertained, I'm enjoying it. But you know, if it is about something, let me know in the comments because I'm definitely missing it. But either way, I really loved this part because it's gotta be one of Cartman's best manipulations to date. Cause bro played Kyle like a fiddle. That line about having his mom's back cause nobody else will, mwah. That's like the best emotional appeal he could have possibly made. And the way he follows it up by immediately going into the halls to spread more anti-Semitic crap about Kyle's mom was hilarious.
Well, I don't know. I would just hate to be a Palestinian hospital. That's all I can say. Well, anyway, good to talk to you guys. Hey, guys! Guys, have you heard about my friend Kyle's mom?
Gotta love that song reference. I think my only issue with this scene is that Stan kinda just didn't intervene with Cartman's plan. I mean, he told Kyle that he should drop it, but like, he could have just told him that Cartman was riling him up on purpose to make more money off the bet, but he didn't, which is pretty uncool for someone that's supposed to be Kyle's best friend. Anyways, like with most of the episodes in this season, the first act is great. It's just really funny, really great setups, tight writing all around. But the question I had going into that first commercial break was, can they keep this up? Or is it gonna fall apart as it goes on like so many of the other episodes this season have? And, well, I'm very happy to say that it didn't fall apart, because acts 2 and 3 were both just as strong, which is something that they were able to achieve for a few reasons, but I think a big part of it was thanks to the very smart decision of bringing Sheila herself into the fold. Because with a story like this, it's easy to make it all about Kyle and have it follow his typical story pattern of getting increasingly outraged until he learns something today. But this episode actually doesn't do that at all. Instead, it has Kyle simmer down because he realizes that defending himself is only going to make people more anti-Semitic, and instead his outrage gets replaced with Sheila's outrage, who is not only the subject of a bet between the kids at school, but is now being questioned by the adults in town too, because apparently they're also using the free market betting app, and to no one's surprise, they're just as stupid and racist as their kids.
It's not Jews versus Palestine, it's Israel versus Palestine. And maybe if you read books instead of everything Hollywood actors say, you'd know the difference.
Now obviously, the real reason that people are grilling Sheila on her views about Israel-Palestine is because they want to know which way they should be betting. But I really enjoyed that they used this plot point to talk about the rise in anti-Semitism that has coincided with the conflict, because it has led to a conflation between Israel and Jewish people amongst some populations. Like, there have been attacks on synagogues and Jewish schools, even though they have little to nothing to do with the actual war or what the Israeli government is doing. And when Kyle starts to express the sentiment that maybe Jews should just lay low for a while, that too is unfortunately a real issue that Jewish people are facing right now. There is a fear of being visible when tensions are so high. But beyond all that, I think the part that makes this storyline truly brilliant is that they kind of lead you on to believe that maybe Sheila actually will bomb the hospital. Because I mean, we know she started a war in Canada before, and this season has been referencing that movie an awful lot. Plus, the plot really seems to be driving things in that direction with how Cartman is pushing the odds on the betting app, and then later putting money down against Sheila while saying stuff like, what could possibly go wrong? So with all that together, I don't know, I kind of believed that it could happen. South Park is crazy enough of a show where something like that actually feels possible. And of course, things only get crazier when we find out that Kyle's mom actually does go to Israel. God, that is such a ridiculous thing to have to say. But yeah, once Cartman realizes that his plan might actually backfire, since Sheila is so pissed off and in Israel, he desperately scrambles to convince Kyle that he needs to put a stop to everything. But since Kyle can't reach his mom on her phone, he convinces Kyle to call someone from within the Israeli government to get the bet taken down. And when Kyle makes that call, can you guess who picks up the phone?
Hello?
Oh, you've got to be me.
Now, they're obviously making some implications here about US-Israel relations, but for me, I just thought this was a great way to reprise that joke from earlier in the episode, because I was not expecting to see that dumb face when he made that phone call. But surprisingly, this phone call actually works, because Don Jr. goes to the White House and basically has this ridiculous conversation with himself, where he acts as all parties involved in the process, which successfully gets the bet removed from the app. Now, this naturally pisses everyone off because they thought they were going to make a bunch of money off of Sheila striking a hospital. But at the very end of the episode, when Cartman and Kyle are sitting on some stairs and talking, Kyle reveals that his mom was never going to bomb a hospital in the first place, and that she was in Israel for a completely different and unrelated reason. Which is when we get the big reveal that Sheila actually flew there to confront the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu.
You're making life for Jews miserable and life for American Jews impossible! Oh, don't you roll your eyes at me, mister!
I loved that ending. I thought it was so cathartic to watch. Like, I'm not a political guy, and I'm definitely not knowledgeable about the conflict in any serious way, but it's pretty obvious to me that the rise in anti-Semitism we've seen over the last couple of years has a lot to do with the actions of Netanyahu. So seeing Sheila ream his ass out was just very satisfying. Plus, it gave me some serious Malcolm in the Middle vibes. Like, I know that show probably wouldn't have an Israel-Palestine episode if it was around today, but like, I got flashbacks to Lois with the way that Sheila was scolding him. So yeah, just a really funny ending all around, and the way the credits had everyone listed as a strategic advisor was just icing on the cake. Anyways, that's it for the recap / analysis portion of this video. Let's move on to the review, shall we? So I think that this was by far the strongest episode in the entire season so far. It was funny, it was tightly written, well structured, especially when you consider just how much they crammed into this thing, and everything unfolded in a very natural and organic way that never felt like they were rushing through the scenes, which is great. You can really tell that it paid off for them to have an extra week to work on this thing because it was very finely crafted compared to the other episodes we've been getting. Even the way they would subtly add little jokes here and there alongside the other main parts of the scene was a highlight for me. Like, for example, when Sheila was yelling about anti-Semitism over dinner with the family, we get a quick moment where Ike decides to be in favor of her bombing the hospital on the betting app, which is just such a funny thing to do, especially given that it's his own mom. But at the same time, I gotta say, even with the tighter writing and stronger episode structure, I still feel like the Trump and Satan stuff is very tacked on. Like, don't get me wrong, this week's storyline was much funnier for them than other recent episodes, and for that reason I did enjoy it more, but it also felt extremely disconnected from everything else that was happening. Like, it had basically no bearing on any part of the episode other than the stuff with the FCC guy Brendan Carr. And that part was definitely funny, but it just felt like I was watching a different show at times, you know? Though I did really enjoy the scene where he's in the hospital with a cast that forces his arm into a Nazi salute.
If the toxoplasmosis parasite gets to his brain, I'm afraid he may lose his freedom of speech.
Now, obviously, I didn't cover this in my analysis, but they're still clearly continuing the serialized element of the Trump and Satan story, only now it seems to be happening through JD Vance. But yeah, I don't know, even with the intrigue around that story and the fact that I actually enjoyed this week's Trump and Satan adventure, I'd still prefer if the episode were to trade that part away in exchange for more focus on the boys and the stuff going on at school or in town. Because at the end of the day, that's more in line with what I'm watching this show for. But having said that, I'm really happy that we did get the boys back after such a long wait, and I don't think it's a coincidence that the episode I felt was the strongest of the season is also the one that featured the boys most prominently. So yeah, overall this is a very consistent and strong episode, and I'm glad that we got to see Sheila because they used her really well and she actually wasn't annoying in this episode, which is pretty cool. Anyways, while I'm pretty sure that there is probably other stuff to say about this episode that I missed, my brain is broken from working non-stop and I don't think I can see anymore. So this is probably a good time for me to end the video and call an ambulance or something. So bye.